Hello, ladies. We had another topic of discussion come up in the Wednesday group, this time around fasting. Now, I have actually already done a session on fasting, on the spiritual practice of fasting, and I am going to send a link for that video out with this video so that you have that in case you want more information. But for now, in order to just deal with this topic briefly, my version of briefly, which you're getting used to, I'm sure, I have two quotes that I want to share with you about fasting, just so that we have at least a decent idea of what God's intention for us is with fasting and how we should view it, how we should approach it, if we are approaching fasting for spiritual reasons. So, in Beth Moore's study on Esther, which God willing, we are going to get to do soon together, Beth Moore writes that the fast that Esther commissioned holds chief significance for several reasons. Now, just as a little bit of background so you know where this comes into the book of Esther. In the book of Esther, she realizes she is going to have to go before the king in a fairly dangerous situation to plead for mercy for her people, the Jews, who are essentially scheduled to be slaughtered. This is very high stakes, very dangerous. So, in the book of Esther, where there are no overt mentions of God, none, she then asks her cousin Mordecai and all of the Jews of Susa to fast. And it is a fairly severe fast. I would not recommend this as normal practice, but they fast from both food and drink for 3 days. So Beth Moore writes, this is important because of the contrast. The most pronounced motif in the entire book of Esther is feasting. The chapters are practically tied together by tablecloths. Not coincidentally, this fast divides the feasts in the narrative in half, strongly implying that the remaining feasts only occur because this fast took place. Then the timing. Remember, the news of the decree hit the provinces the very day the Passover celebration was intended to begin among the Jews. Feasting was the cornerstone of the entire remembrance. Only something monumental could have trumped the commanded ritual, turning its feasting into fasting. Perhaps we can best relate by imagining dreadful news on Christmas Day, calling for fasting while turkeys roast in the oven and pies cool on kitchen counters. The emotional whiplash would be brutal. Then the severity. In the ancient world, most fasts were either limited to daylight hours or certain foods and rarely included fasting from water. The risk of dehydration was too serious. Severe maladies often call for severe remedies, however. Perhaps most interesting is what this kind of fast would do to Esther's appearance. Remember, the harem girls were fattened up for the king, not starved into sticks. So, just a side note there. Esther is preparing to go before the king. The Persian culture of the time would have said, you make yourself pretty and you make sure that physically you are as pleasing as possible to gain his favor. And she is entirely going against that. And she is actually tapping into a very, I want to say severe, but a very important spiritual practice that would have seemed really foolish to the culture surrounding her, but she is drawing on wisdom from God. Then the implication, a momentous element. Let me try that again. A momentous element of the fast in Esther is the profound implication of prayer. In a book of the Bible with no mention of God, fasting indicates prayer, and prayer indicates God. After all, fasting for fasting's sake is futile. Our assumption is that Esther and the Jews of Susa went without food so they could wholeheartedly focus their petitions before God. Their refusal to receive sustenance demonstrated their desperation to receive something much greater, deliverance. Now, this is why it is so incredibly important that our fasting includes prayer, because without that turning to God, and I'm going to read more about that in a moment, without that aspect, it is not spiritual, because we do not have spiritual clout all on our own. It's just a diet, then a really weird, severe diet. Beth Moore goes on, in the whole of Israel's history, God's people were never called to fast for fasting's sake. They were called to forego food to deny all else but God. So when we are studying in our current study on the Sermon on the Mount, these passages about the hypocrites who are fasting for the sake of people's attention to increase their own, I'm going to say like relational or social clout, kind of their own weight that way. That is a whole other reason for fasting. And so, yeah, they will get what they want out of it. But if they expect there to be spiritual benefits as well, they're going to be very disappointed because it doesn't work that way. Either we are turning to God or we're not. Then the other quote I want to read you comes from this book, and that is reflecting, Anne Graham Lotz' study on the Daniel prayer. She writes, forsaking everything to make the time to get alone with God and pray is a form of fasting. Fasting simply means to go without anything and everything to make time to pray. And we associate it most often with abstaining from food, but it can also be abstinence from business, emails, phone calls, ministry, entertainment, web surfing, meetings, housework, shopping, cooking, talking, television, technology. The list is unlimited. While in prayer, we turn to God. In fasting, we turn away from everything else. One reason we fast is not to show God how pious we are. He already knows. It is not a work we are to add to our prayer effort to merit his answer. His answers are gifts of his grace, not rewards for our work. It is not to make God love us more or pay us more attention. He loves us completely, fully. He can't love us anymore. And he has already given us his undivided attention without our fasting. So why do we fast? One reason is because Jesus expects us to fast, and this is what we're studying. He told his disciples, when you fast, not if you fast. For myself, again, this is Anne talking, fasting has helped to purify my motives in prayer. It sharpens my focus on heavenly things and clarifies my perspective on earthly things. It prompts me to pray more persistently and frequently. And perhaps most importantly, it reveals how sincere I really am as I seek the Lord in prayer. And again, that is not to convince God of our sincerity. That is revealing the sincerity that is within us. Because if you have to turn away from something in order to turn to God, and you start finding, oh, I'm having a hard time turning away from that, that is going to reveal something about our heart motives and where our heart is right then. So when we are fasting for something other than spiritual reasons, let's say for weight loss, there's intermittent fasting that is becoming increasingly popular. Yes, there are certain physiological benefits to certain types of fasting. Nothing is being disputed there. But do not expect, if that is our reason for fasting, that there is going to be these bonus spiritual benefits as well. One of the very cool things is when we fast for spiritual reasons, yes, it does include some physiological effects. There is a clarity of mind that comes in when we fast for food, for instance. But as Anne pointed out, we do not only have to fast from food in order to have a form of fasting in our spiritual life. So we just need to watch, I think, as we are studying in our current passages on the Sermon on the Mount, we really need to watch what is our motive here. If our motive is to seek God more, to open up our own kind of schedule so we can have that freedom to seek him increasingly, that's a really good reason to fast. You might also be familiar with the practice of fasting during Lent, where we give something up for Lent, which is the 40 days leading up to Easter. When we are fasting during Lent, it is not some kind of magical season where if I just give up something random like chocolate, because I got to give up something, then I'm going to have spiritual benefits. Again, motive matters, as does our practice of seeking God along with our fasting. The point of fasting anything in Lent, of giving anything up for Lent, is that we then use not only perhaps the time and attention and resources that are freed up by giving that thing up in order to seek God, to draw near to Him, but that every time a desire or craving or hunger for that thing comes up, that is a reminder, a prompt to seek God. It's a way that God has given us to incorporate our entire being in seeking Him, and our whole being should be seeking God. So fasting, as long as it is paired with prayer, is going to have spiritual benefits. But if we're fasting for other reasons, that's fine. Just don't expect it to have spiritual benefits. So again, this is dealt with in much more detail in the video. I'm going to send a link for to you where I talked about it much longer. And if you have further questions or if you want more information, I have lots and lots of resources that I can share with you. Thanks, ladies.